Hello, hello. Welcome to the Luthiers podcast. This is Jason Rodgers. We appreciate you sticking with us. We are putting out shows as we can, while we can, when we can. And I think you're going to enjoy this episode of the Luthiers podcast with Les Godfrey of Godfrey Guitars. Les is out of Toronto and makes some really cool guitars and basses and skateboards. Les has great outlook and perspective on the world of lutherie and his own place in that. Once again, we appreciate you sticking with us and checking out all of the back episodes that we have here. If you are a patron, you will have access to more than just the episodes that we have posted, but some way back episodes, as well as some special content of recordings that we've done in addition to the episodes that you'll see listed on Podbean. So let's get rolling here with Les Godfrey Guitars. We'll just start the show here. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Luthiers podcast, Les Godfrey.
Well, thank you very much, Jason. It's a pleasure to be on here with you.
Cool. So I made some mistakes with time zone and stuff like this because you're in Toronto.
Yes, pretty much. Yes.
And so that's one time zone over than I thought you were. And so you build mostly bass guitars, but you also obviously if anybody checks out your Instagram, Godfrey Guitars, and on Facebook as well at Godfrey Guitars as well, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You build 6-string guitars and stuff, as well as now skateboards, and so you got an interesting lineup of stuff. But let's where do you want to start talking about your experience and how you got into this world, this crazy world of lutherie?
Oh wow, okay. Well, I'll say it definitely started with my dad just being in the shop, and when we were kids, not having a lot of money. He would make us Star Wars spaceships, so if a toy came out, a Star Wars movie, they were never to scale to the action figures, so my dad would go in the shop and make the most ruthlessly accurate X magazine, detailed models for us, and so it kind of got me thinking, you can really make something out of anything if you really want to. So getting into skateboarding when I was younger, you'd break a skateboard, or my friends' skateboards would break, so I'd do a little woodwork on it. Long story short, just later when I got into playing bass, I was working at an animation studio, and one day I just started looking at basses, Alembics, all these really nice high-end basses, just, like getting into that stuff, Stanley Clark, and I remember a guy at my work came in and he said, I said, what do you have in your box there, this box of wood? And he said, I've got this, some Wenge, some Bobinge, all these exotic wood names.
Wow.
And he said, I'm going to build myself like a Warwick-style bass. And I just thought that was just unreal. I never dawned on me that you could really just make something, just get the wood and make it. So I remember it stayed on my mind, and then pretty much, I think probably 2 months later, I went and got some wood and tried to make my own first bass, and it was horrible. But it plugged in, and it kind of worked, and I ended up using it for a little show I had to do for a friend, and it kind of held up. So from there, I just kind of kept experimenting for a little while, and saw some Carl Thompson bass. I was a fan of his from the Stanley Clark days, seeing photos of him with his bass. So that was sort of the first bass that I wanted to emulate. And then from there, I eventually called Carl one day, and I said, Carl, can you, would you interested in having someone down? And I didn't hear back from him. And then eventually one day I heard back from him, and he said, where are you? And I said, well, I'm here. And he says, you were supposed to be here yesterday, man. And I said, okay, well, I'll get down to New York. So I went all the way down, and then I just started trying to learn stuff. I probably caused him more bull crap than, because,
financial ruin.
Yeah, when you make mistakes. So, but he was very patient with me, and so were all the other guys there. And I just kept trying at it. Yeah.
So what? I mean, what's I've only recently, through Instagram, checked out his stuff, and I mean, of course, I've known about him for a long time because Les Claypool was kind of one of the people in the rock and prog scene that kind of made his basses a little bit more visible, especially like on the cover of guitar magazines and stuff like that. But it wasn't until recently that looking at his Instagram and his little videos and things, how his shop is set up, and it seems like there's a lot of just simply gluing stuff up with Type Bond and just carving all of this stuff by hand, and it's really, I mean, it's really one-off stuff, isn't it? Is that what you experienced there?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and very same thing, just complete hand fabrication of all the parts. There's no CNC, there's no milling machine. It's relatively rudimentary woodworking tools, like like stuff that you would get even for a small shop. But he's been doing it that way since the 70s, and he hasn't really changed his method too much. Just changed those subtle things in the ingredients and the techniques along the way. But yeah, no, very similar building style than from when I was there in the late 90s. Very much. One off, just draw the shape out, listen to what the customer wants, and but that was all for Carl. If he was the one responsible for all that. I was just doing some carving and learning some things, and and again, Calvin Daly was there at the time, and Mike Slatzinger. So, and they already had some building experience, far beyond what I did with Carl. So it was a good learning experience beyond. Like, still to this day, I marvel that he just let some kind of relatively random person come down and be very kind and no, really honestly, it's like I don't know if I would be able to do that. Hey,
right.
Come on and just hang out with me for 2 months.
Well, it was you were telling me in an earlier phone call that it was clearly the Polaroids that you sent him that were the the deciding factor in this.
Oh, that's right. Yes. I built like a kind of a crude rainbow-based copy, and a couple other kind of bases a little bit in that style. Not necessarily overly derivative to the point where I was trying to knock them off or anything, but then they were just for me. But I thought, I didn't have, a really good camera at the time, so I just sent them Polaroids, and I thought, maybe that'll work. And it did. He was intrigued. He's like, well, okay, you know kind of what you're doing, I think, but, not at all. But it was funny that I think it got me the gig anyway.
So do you think his thought process was, man, this kid's stuff is really effed up here, I need to set him on the right track? Or do you think he was going, oh man, he might actually give me a run for my money, I'm going to have to incorporate him quickly?
I definitely think it was maybe just a little bit of intrigue, because in our first conversations, in that conversation, I think he liked that I knew a little bit about the history of it, like where he was from the Charles Labo shop, back in the guitar clinic days when we used to work on Frank Zappa's guitars.
Oh, wow.
Guitars. And that's where those guys all came from, working on all the instruments. Alfonso Johnson's bass from Weather Report. And then I guess eventually Carl kind of went on his own. Carl also used to work for with Dan Armstrong. He did the basses for Ampeg, during that era.
Oh, wow.
When he did the Dan Armstrong C3 Plexi. So he was kind of part of that as well. So he has just a long history of building instruments and being around what the players really want as well. Working on all the guitars that the guys in New York used to bring in, say, I've got this old Fender, but it doesn't really play all that great. And they're the guys that really went in and sort of changing the 7.5 radius to a 9 radius, and changing frets out, and discovering that the frets went in sideways on old Fenders, and
right.
All those things that a lot of luthiers and pair guys take for granted. They were definitely I think the first wave of guys. They did sort of discovered all the.
I'm embarrassed to say that I did not know Carl's history to that detail. That I think a lot of the sort of the reading and education in air quotes that I've gotten over the years has been very much a West Coast centric kind of thing, with especially with reading the Guild of American Luthiers, Quarterly American Luthier. It tends to be very West Coast in terms of the people that they are interviewing, because it's kind of everybody interviewing their friends with a couple like random things from the other side of the states and into Canada, and some random stuff throughout Europe and stuff. So that's really cool. I'm glad to know that. I need to go do some more reading myself. So what you were telling me in that previous phone call that you started building with the scrolls and at least some of those more kind of violin kind family kind of appointments where C-bout kind of points and things. What made you, aside from Carl's influence, what made you decide to go in that direction? And like when do you think that you really solidified your design and as something that people could see and be like, oh yeah, that's a Godfrey?
Oh yeah. Well, I could definitely point it almost to a very specific day. I remember. No, I really can. I was into playing upright bass. Of course, I knew about Carl Thompson's instruments, but definitely was really into upright bass, and I got an upright bass, and I was like, okay, this is what I kind of want to do. But I also was playing a lot of electric bass and really into Jaco Pastorius and all that kind of stuff. So I thought, it'd be neat to get something that's kind of got both sort of schools to it, the electric vibe and the old sort of upright vibe. So, you have your Hofners and
right.
those kinds of instruments, but I wanted something a little bit different. So then I looked and I saw an Ampeg scroll bass from the 60s, a horizontal that the F-holes cut right through it, and I just fell in love with that bass. So they had one in Elba, New York, Lark Street Music, an old one, and it was the exact one I wanted. It was fretless and everything.
Wow.
So I put it on layaway. We couldn't afford it quite at the time, so I waited for it. So as I was waiting for it, being the nerd that I am, I kept drawing it in my notebook, and then I made a little miniature of it. So as I was drawing it out, I was just drawing the F-hole pattern, like the two offset F-holes. And my brother and my dad saw the drawing. They thought I was drawing kind of like a double offset scroll bass. So my brother was like, you should play with that a little bit. So I did that afternoon. I kind of made the shape, the very first shape is kind of much cruder than it is now. But then, being that it looks so violin, I realized that, probably the scrolls would look a little too derivative if I made them too round. So, again, my brother and my dad encouraged me to maybe make it a little more violin-oriented, like make the scrolls actual voluted violin scrolls and maybe arch the top. So, of course, that put me on a whole other adventure with it because I had to get books from the Benedetto book on how to make arch tops, so I could figure out how to arch a top. And then violin books, and cello making books and stuff to figure out how to do the, the carved edges and kind of get some of the proportions down. So it's been a whole work in progress. Everyone's different. I've never made the same shape twice, and I've always just changed one little thing on it or slanted a little different. However the customer's built, however long their arms are, however their thumb bends, everything I have to take into account for their instrument because it makes a huge difference. So that's been kind of where I've been at with it. But the violin thing and the whole scroll thing definitely came from a passion for upright basses, but also my longing for an Ampeg scroll bass. So I just wanted to do something that just sort of fused the two, and that's pretty much how I came up with it.
That's really cool. The you say that you try to tailor the instrument very, very closely to the player's needs. What do you have a lot of local customers? How do people get in touch with you, and how do they make those requests about very specific physical contact kind of needs with the instrument?
Usually, when people get in touch, they're usually intrigued with the design. Like they like the way it looks. A lot of people do buy kind of with their eyes first, whether or not you choose to admit it or not. Usually it helps when you like the way the instrument looks, and then hopefully if you like it the way it looks enough, hopefully it sounds great. I do know some people that only go from sound. They'll just pick up a bunch of guitars and they'll go for that. But I know a lot of people who are buying higher end instruments also go for the beauty of the instrument. So the goal is one, you want the two to go in tandem. But definitely when I'm dealing with the customers and starting to get, their criteria down, listen to what their wants and needs are. On top of that, not that I care how so much, someone would look or what, it's not a judgmental thing. I'm very specific about, how tall are you? What's your stature?
Mm-hmm.
What are the size of your hands? And one thing I'm very specific about is whether your thumbs are double jointed or not.
Oh.
Like if you got the Jacko kind of style thumbs, or if you got thumbs that stay straight, because when you're playing bass, all the anchor points, the way the neck's shaped, all those things will make a huge difference into how you're feeling the bass out. So it's amazing when I've made basses for people who've got hyper-indexing thumbs that really bend back, and I carve the neck a certain way, pitch the neck back a certain way, and at the same time look at where the neck intersects the body. Those are things that are really, really huge for people who want something custom that's not just fitting on the sort of the 1950s, electric bass
mm-hmm.
platform where that's where where the waist is, that's where the first fret is.
Right.
Some people really can't adapt to that, but they really want to play bass. So, if you don't want to make them a super, super short scale bass, there's all these things you can do to make it so it kind of fools the player into thinking, well, the space is a little small or easier for me to get around. So
mm-hmm.
I like to listen to a lot of those criteria. And every time I'm dealing with a new customer, I draw several versions of it. And only when we kind of consolidate the things enough will I take the order on to do it.
That's I've had a couple of really interesting conversations in the past couple of months with people about some of those really fine details of the body, the human body meeting the body of the guitar. But I've not had a conversation. I've not heard people being so specific about that thumb movement joint kind of. So what is if a person has a very, very bendy thumb where they can practically bend back at 90 degrees to the bone, what sort of is there something that makes it easier or more challenging to play a typical jazz bass or P bass?
Well, I just noticed that players that don't really have a thumb that bend back typically play a little bit more with a free stroke. If they're playing with their fingers a pizzicato, usually it's that the hand is sort of more floating over the strings. Where I notice with players who really, really push in with that bent back thumb, like Jacqueline basically rested on top of that pickup where the thumb is basically almost perpendicular to the bass. I've noticed that those players typically play with a much harder, almost like a rest stroke. So the as the fingers coming in contact with the string, it's actually pushing, hyperflexing the knuckle backward direction, whereas a lot of people play with a free stroke, keep the knuckles sort of straight. So I've noticed that's one huge thing with how that the player comes up and over the bass. So therefore,
this is right hand you were talking about. I thought,
yeah.
Is there a left hand component as well?
Absolutely. I noticed that players who play with who don't have a hyperflexing thumb usually typically like a more rounded C-shaped neck. And I know as people who have hyper back thumb usually kind of tend to like the neck to be more of a soft V shape. So there's and not always, but it's been something that I just noticed over the last 20 years, sort of like just taking notes and sort of noticing what players seem to like. And I'll be like, hey, let me see your hands. And I'll be like, well, okay, maybe your hands are a little bit like mine, or they remind me of my other friends' hands. And it sounds like a strange thing, but it seems to be the fatigue point for a lot of players.
Right.
The shoulders, but I noticed there's that point between the index finger and the thumb that seems to be a massive fatigue point for a lot of players. So I seem to just try and get in there and just try and do little things that I know make that little difference, to the wrist not really being, in a nasty position, in first position and all that. Because it's like, some people just got really long arms and some people don't. And some people have really big hands and short arms. Some people have got long arms and small hands.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where, because we're not making pianos, and I know there's a standardization to, certain things and rules that we all adhere to. But I've realized that over the years that there's so much you can do with the shape and the intersecting points and the side view geometry of the instrument that even just that that play just such a huge role in just ultimately if the player will keep wanting to pick it up or not. And and I also don't like the instrument to be overly heavy. I notice I don't really pick up heavy instruments very often, but some people love them, but I find most people will go for the lighter instrument. It just feels right most times.
My mind is working really hard now. I'm just thinking about all these things because, like, I'm thinking about all of the different shapes of necks that I've carved, whether they've been a little bit more of a shreddy kind of C kind of feel, or whether it's a little bit more of a flatter D kind of thing. Something that I've started doing with my 7 and 8 strings is doing an asymmetrical, where it's a little bit thicker on the treble side, and it kind of falls away towards the bass side. And I've had different people, at guitar shows and stuff like that, pick up guitars and play them, and some people have been like, yeah, it's kind of an interesting feel. That's not really my thing. And I've had other people say, like, oh man, that's the best feeling neck I've ever held, and and I have not been able to really quantify why, other than it's just like, well, that's what they like, or it's based on the first guitar that they ever picked up, which and maybe that's the question I need to ask. I'm like, so did you start on an Ibanez jam or something like that, or did you start playing some sort of baseball bat neck or something like that? But talking about the way that the hand is actually built, and the way that it moves and flexes, that's I mean, now that I'm saying this out loud, I'm like, geez, it seems really naive to like to say this, but this is kind of an awareness that I've not had at that level. So I've learned something today. I appreciate this. I'm gonna think more on that.
Well, what's interesting too, just a side note, is I noticed that since shred guitar in the '80s became prominent for a while, I noticed that players changed their technique from basically one hand squeezing one orange to the other hand squeezing an orange, that technique, to where a lot of players play with very spread hand, very flat hands at the fingerboard, as opposed to the fingers being curled down.
Mm-hmm.
Bass players as well, they play with a flat finger technique as opposed to fingers over and fingers round. It's a very prominent thing I notice now with all the muting that people do. Mm-hmm. So I've noticed that's really changed, again, as you've probably noticed with your extended string instruments and multi-scale instruments, that obviously there's some things that might have to happen for the hand to fall in naturally to the places that it normally goes to. So favoring the treble side, you might not be on the basses as much. So it's like, let's make the neck comfortable where we're kind of playing where we primarily are. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting with your concept where that neck, I've kind of tried something like that, but because my thumb's bend back so much, I tried doing guitar where I did the opposite. I put it thicker on the bass side and then favored it down towards the treble side. So as I'm doing bends, my weird bent back thumb is always into the neck. Mm-hmm. This little flat facet that's kind of pushing up against gravity. Mm-hmm. So it defined what the neck wanted to do, but it agreed with what my hand wanted to do. Mm-hmm. So there's all these strange things that I'm noticing with design where, oh wow, like the design wants to do this in terms of how it looks, but the function for maybe what my hand might be very different than what someone else's, and that's what I mean. It might be the exact opposite as to what someone else might want, or that kind of profile or whatever. So it's very strange.
Right. The rationale that I've been using for the asymmetrical with the thicker treble and falling off towards the bass, more of a teardrop shape like that, was when you go to an extended range instrument and you have a wider neck, there's probably I guess it depends on the style of music that you play, but the way the hand wants to feel something familiar, and so the way that I drew and I carved that apex that's shifted over towards the treble is so that it's actually where it would normally be on a 6 string. And so from your palm on the high, whatever the high E or whatever your tuning is, that side, as your fingers and your thumb is reaching across the neck, it feels a thickness that is in a familiar point, familiar place. And even though you can, definitely, you're obviously reaching lower to a 7th string or an 8th string, and some guitar builders are going to 9 strings now. You're always coming back and referencing that thickest point on a familiar geometry, and then as you're reaching over, even though it's wider, it feels thinner suddenly, and maybe that's not so weird anymore. It doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, I'm playing this huge fat neck. It tells you I'm feeling a somewhat normal neck, but I can reach down to lower strings. I have this whole other, playground I can go into. But I don't know. I explained that to a couple people, and they're like, yeah, maybe. And a couple of other people who were like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And now that you say it, I think I feel that too. I could be full of shit too.
No, I think that kind of like the way that the electric guitar kind of adapted from the lap steel. I think it was the Slingerland company that made the 2 models of the one with the Spanish neck and the one with the lap steel neck, and that sort of, to me, was like adapting one thing to something else. You adapt the lap steel to now one that you can kind of sit with horizontally and play like a Spanish guitar. So when I think of sort of the fusion that's happened now with blending 2 instruments together for a function, I'd say it's been the Chapman stick standard guitar have come together. And so people have, and then you get, Ralph Novak and Harry Fleischman sort of pioneering the fan frets. And then you start getting into what the Chapman stick kind of desires to have, what the extended range guitar wants to have. But now what you're doing is you're doing what Slingerland did with their lap steel, is you're making it a guitar that you're not playing like a Chapman stick, you're playing it like a regular guitar. So as soon as all those 3 things have come together, luthiers are realizing a lot that has to happen to make those 3 things work together. The fan frets, a guitar that plays in a traditional way, and one that you can kind of finger tap on and play like a Chapman stick. There's a lot of players that are doing that. From Charlie Hunter on, where all kinds of players doing extended range stuff and also 2-handed techniques. So that's what I think a lot of the modern builders are contending with. Is the criteria has gotten far more eccentric, but let's face it, the music describes what the guitars have to be, but at the same time, the guitars describe what the music kind of might be.
Right.
So
right.
It's been interesting. So when I see your work, I can see what you're contending with, doing not only extended strings, multi-string, but also at the same time, dealing with the criteria that have to, that happen because of that. All the things that happen as a result of that. I might have to fan fret it. Okay, I might have to do this with the neck shape. So it's a fine act right now, designing guitars. It's the criteria that the players have is quite daunting at times.
But if anything, though, it's the modern electric guitar has been around long enough now that we're really able to, and especially now with the explosion of the boutique instrument market, we're able to chase all of those rabbits down all of those holes and to make sure that that there is something out there for everyone. There is a guitar shape, there is a guitar size, there's a guitar weight, there is a number of strings, and it's really quite inspiring seeing the solutions that people are coming up with.
I agree, and I also with you hear people complaining about the music industry. There really not being an industry. Well, there is an industry, of course, but it just isn't the way it used to be, and nothing ever is. But one thing that it has done is it's created like a rite of passage for musicians and artists to sort of create without the backdrop of saying this is the way it has to be. You have to fit in on MTV to be big now or something. There really isn't that pressure. So now there's all kinds of new music coming out, experimental stuff, and everybody in that stuff usually is requiring something kind of special for, whether it's a special guitar, whether it's a special effects unit or something to make it all possible. So that's what I'm liking right now, with sort of the lack of sort of, I don't know what to say, one sort of industry for everything to fit into.
Mm-hmm.
It's fragmented so much that now it's really anything goes. Musicians are doing what they feel like they want to do and creating new things because they don't have that pressure. And the luthiers I notice, are doing the same thing, just sort of saying, "Wow, I can make anything that I want," or I don't feel the limitations to meet the criteria of this particular player. I noticed that, like I find that very inspiring. So it's not like right now all we're seeing is super strats again.
Right.
All we're seeing, it's like we're seeing everything now, from multi-string classical guitars to like Alan Beard's whole fan fret, jazz guitars from the future.
Yeah.
It's incredible. But I don't know if that would happen or would have happened, this sort of renaissance of ideas, if there would have been sort of not a little bit of a fragmentation of the music industry.
Mm-hmm.
It's people. I know it's upsetting it to some, but I do think it's been a huge thing, and new music being made and new ideas from luthiers coming out.
I think that's a really great, sort of refreshing and very optimistic kind of view of this whole topic of there was that, I can't remember who wrote it now. There was that article that came out earlier in the year. It was called like the death of the electric guitar or something, and there was this. There was quite an uproar, in social media, and a lot of people, or a handful of people that I follow, builders and guitar players, who were posting a link to that, and then sort of their post becoming the sounding board for people either agreeing with it or, and just kind of like making these little mini discussions and stuff. And then of course you can see that popping up on some of the forums and things like that too. But basically it said there is no commercial music that really relies on the guitar as it once did, or at least, I mean, it's not as guitar centric as it used to be. Just sort of like you take a sample of everything that's out there. It's not as guitar centric as it used to be, and it was a very, very pessimistic and dark outlook for the musical instrument industry in general. And whether or not, as boutique builders, we see ourselves as part of that larger umbrella, it was basically saying, like, these Chinese factories are cranking out a bazillion instruments a day, and it's the world is flooded with guitars, but is anybody really playing them? And it's just so I like how you're describing a world more where people are maybe taking a step back and rediscovering the guitar in their own ways, and through maybe less traditional veins, and seeking out instruments that are specifically suiting their needs, rather than just like, I'm going to go to Guitar Center and pick up the cheapest Strat copy I can find. Yeah.
Well, it seems to come full circle. For instance, you'll get a lot of electronic musicians. For instance, you'll get a lot of guitar players. Sometimes you'll on here, I'll quote some social media stuff. Sometimes on social media, I've seen the presence of certain people saying, it's guitar and rock and roll, and electronic music is terrible and all this, and it doesn't require any skill. And I beg to differ. It requires a lot of skill to make music. That's good music. It requires a lot of skill to be a composer, and it requires a lot of skill to get a certain emotion across in music, let alone technique. That's a whole other skill in itself that brings most people to loving music as opposed to just being technicians. So as long as there's music lovers, there's going to be people wanting to make music. And I think that with the guitar in particular, the industry definitely got a little flooded, the vintage market there for a little while, and things, but things come in and out. For instance, you get a lot of electronic musicians that spend a lot of time, getting their sounds perfect. And then they get that one day where they're hanging out with some friends and they throw some mics in front of a drum kit and an acoustic guitar, and like there's this revelation.
Yeah.
Right? They're like, no, it's like, no, seriously, I've seen it happen. They're like, no, it's almost, I think it's not easier, but they'll just be like, wow, like, there's something so pure about it. I'm not like, and then you'll get other people who have been doing that, the folk stuff, for a while, and they can't believe the emotional impact of being able to work with electronic music. So that's another thing I was saying about the modern guitar. Just like bass in the 80s, guitar has to work now with electronic music much more now. Just the way bass had to fit in the 80s, guitars now has to fit in for a lot of scenarios in that regard, you know. So, you know, you hear it, you know, Flock of Seagulls, Joy Division, you hear all these bands from the 80s that still have that guitar element. And that's sort of become, it's now just become a part of metal. It's become a part of jazz music, where the guitar has become almost a synthesizer at points. You know, even in modern jazz, even guys like Pat Metheny and stuff, the guitar doesn't always necessarily sound like a guitar.
Right. Yeah.
So with that, I realized that, you know, the discovery of the guitar, you know, maybe Alan Holdsworth and all those guys really were like completely ahead of their time, where it really is a MIDI controller, and it really is something that's what it's going to be used as, because just certain things you can do with a guitar that you can't do with other instruments. So I think that it's just that we're seeing the role of it, not to keep talking about that part of it, but I think we're just seeing the role of it change, and we're not seeing it as upfront in rock and roll anymore. But I still think that the function of the guitar and where it's being used is still pretty prime. It's just not as front and center anymore. That's all. You know, someone might be standing. Again, here we go. Edgar Winter used to stand there with that keyboard around his neck, you know, and play all that crazy stuff, and everybody would be like, "It's cool, but it's not cool." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now that's like that's totally fine. Now it's like, yeah, it might be just the way things are. It's like everybody's front and center, and everything's got equal importance. So I think that as a guitar maker or an instrument maker, when you start looking at, well, everything's not so rock and roll royalty anymore. That's changed. You know, the Rolling Stones still own that throne, and they're never going to let it go. So no one's going to get it for a long time. It's their thing. So it's one of those things where, what else can we do with our time and not try and be the Rolling Stones or the next big rock star? Well, we can make a lot of great music and supply a lot of great instruments for people who want to do something new and different. So I think that's sort of where I get my kicks, trying to look at the obscurities of, you know, and try to meet those criteria, and that's the big challenge.
Well, that is worthy indeed. We're talking about guitars and the shape of instruments and how they intersect with the human body and the needs for playing. So you've been working on a really interesting model. You're calling it the Trilogy.
Yeah.
And so it's I gotta tell you, I really admire this instrument, and I hope to see it as successful as possible for you, because I don't know about other people, listeners and people who have ever, you know, doodled and sketched guitars and things, but at some point in time in the last, I don't know how many, 25, 30 years that I've been doodling and sketching guitars since, you know, I started playing guitars. So at some point in time, you try something very geometric, you know. And I remember trying doodling something where there was like all these very sort of harmonious intersections of circles and things, and that, you know, there was some ideas that I thought might fly and have some traction, but there were some other things that I just immediately tossed out. But you're going at triangles here, and you know, obviously there are certain ways that you can imagine the traditional guitar body oriented with just, you know, straight lines and triangles. But you've gone a really interesting direction here. What was your inspiration for this trilogy?
Oh wow! One is I've seen a lot of people making like a Tele or T-style guitar, you know, and I've always loved. I mean, that's the, you know, kind of like one of the original platforms for what most of us do, and there's something appealing to it. There's something, I have to admit, there's something appealing to like an old Telecaster, that old blonde beat up Telecaster. But at the same time, I saw a picture of Waylon Jennings back in the day. I think there's like a girl passed out beside him. He doesn't have his leather covered telly. He's just got a blonde telly. And the headstock's cut like an arrow. It just looks like a triangle. Like, I don't know if the headstock broke, but the headstock's cut to look almost like an arrow, a sharp dagger or something. And I've never seen another picture of him with that guitar, and it stayed in my mind because to me it looked kind of hot rodded. Like, why did they do that? And then I started looking down at the body, and I said, kind of like Joe Jem Dispagni, rest in peace. He just passed away recently. But, from Jem Guitars, he kind of invented sort of the modern shred guitar, for Steve Vai back in the day and stuff. And he would just go at it. He would just draw on the guitar and cut it down and hot rod it, made the flame guitar, all these crazy guitars back in the day. And so I remember looking down at the body of Waylon Jennings' guitar and thinking, wouldn't it be funny if the person who did his headstock
also started
crazy with the body, started hacking it down a little bit.
Yeah,
that's what Bill Carson did with his Telecaster, and then came up with the Strat, which was going to be called the Bill Carson guitar. But then Leo decided to call it the Stratocaster. I think him and Jimmy Bryant were fighting for the title of it being called either the Jimmy Bryant model or the Bill Carson model. But I thought it was just cool that they were already hot rodding guitars in Bakersfield, make them a little more comfortable. So I looked at it and said, I want two triangles. I want to ratio them. I want to stick them together, and I want to make it look like just a Bakersfield crazy guitar that maybe someone just made, and a little artsy, but at the same time just off enough so it doesn't look too artsy. So I almost wanted to make it look a little bit primitive and a little bit childish, a little bit like an old barn or an old sign that got thrown together. So that's been the goal, but trying to get that vibe and keep it really simple and not but put scrolls and ornamentation over it. It's been a total new challenge for me, trying to keep it streamlined and conceptual looking, so when it's done, it doesn't look like really anything's been added to it. So it's been a challenge to try and do that.
And what you're going for, you're saying what you're going for is actually a Telecaster kind of sound.
Yeah, I want it to have a little bit of that, except for the neck pickup's going to be hidden, so just the blade's going to show through the Bakelite pickup.
Oh, cool.
And but it'll be a humbucker, but just one of the blades showing through, the other one buried behind. So it'll have a really big fat neck pickup sound. So if you want to do the Ed Becker thing, get really jazzier, the jazzier part of the Texas swing, you can. But if you want to get the telly sound, then you just go to the bridge pickup and hit that in. But I want to keep the electronics very simple, just like a push-pull knob to engage some things. And that's pretty much it, just a slab. But I have to say, of all my electric shapes that I've made so far, even sitting with this one, it defies what it looks like because it's so comfortable. Like, with all the vantage points, where it sits.
There's nothing pokey on it, huh?
not at all.
Yeah.
None of the pokies hit you. So it's many people have sat with it in the shop so far and been like, this is incredible how comfortable this is. So it's interesting how you can play. I think Rick Toone does a great job of that.
Yeah.
He's talking about that. Like, it's like you were saying that. Like, it says he's got these vantage points on his stuff. You're saying too, like, just it's kind of, yeah. It's sort of like you start looking at all these things that you can maybe do to say, well, how invisible can I make this, but I still want to embrace it like an accordion at the same time. So I kind of like guitars where you can do that. Like, step them, have them float a little bit, but ones that then you come right back over and hold on to it.
Yeah, Rick Toone is a big hero of mine, and it was really in a time when I was very much kind of hemming and hawing over what I wanted my first guitar to be and like what direction I wanted to go in, and because I had ideas aplenty, I had dead end projects that had started, and then I found his guitars, and I just said, I can just go for it, because I don't know, there was something about seeing his designs that, not necessarily the super ergonomic angle of his design, but the very sort of organic, form, free flowing form, knots and chisel marks and burn marks and all, included in that, just becoming beautiful. It gave me the courage to strike out and just say, hey, this doesn't need to be perfect. And if anything, all of those beautiful imperfections can be something that maybe ties together this first attempt, instead of trying to go perfect and glossy and blemish free or anything. And I've said it before, Rick Toon does things that I'm still not brave enough to attempt, because it's he's reimagined the instrument as something that it only touches you where it needs to, and anything else is either completely removed or has become an opportunity for creating really interesting textures, whether that be wood grains going in directions that you wouldn't expect, or whether it be aircraft aluminum and carbon fiber melding with this sort of like this biomech kind of looking thing. It's I check his website or his blog regularly, and I'm always just floored and being like, there it is.
Oh, absolutely. And another thing it's one thing when you kind of realize, okay, that's he's conceptualizing that stuff, but it's another thing to see it through.
Oh, yeah.
And he sees it through and then some, and then the stuff is like beyond functional.
Yeah.
So I've always admired that. It's just that drive of creativity, where it's just there's really no limits. I mean, we all work within certain rules, so instruments sort of maybe function on a level where we can universally agree maybe that's in tune or not. But even now, that whole concept's being stretched. I mean, microtonal guitars, fully tempered guitars. We have classicals with frets in all these different positions.
Yeah,
so that
just
really
tuning,
sounds
right?
in tune.
Yeah,
and you realize, what how far can we take this, and how sensitive is the ear getting? And I have to admit that even the older that I'm getting working on the instruments, my ear's starting to get a lot more finicky. And I'm like, oh man, like, where can this go? What can you? And so, then you look and go online, you see what other people are going with. You're like, wow, okay, there's some really awesome, crazy, creative luthiers out there. I'm like, wow, okay, so it's amazing to see what criteria is the most important, and that's what I like doing. I like seeing, okay, this guy or this luthier, they're really into intonation. Like intonation's their thing, you know what I mean? And then you might get into an acoustic maker like Brian Gallup or something, and they're into it all, of course, but they got a skill in choosing wood and getting tops very consistent. Like that's just uncanny ability, and technique. So I like that. Everybody is wanting to make a full, complete instrument, of course, but I really like looking where I can tell someone's got like their intrinsic interest, and I think those are the things that allow us to share what we all do, and kind of get those other little things that maybe we're having problems with, or having a problem solved, and include it. So it's like I've said with the guitar building stuff, it's all fairly incestuous in terms of where the information comes from, what we're all drawing from for what we're making. So I find trying to meet the criteria of modern players and stuff is something that I'm noticing that's better. Right now, I'm loving the collaboration between luthiers, is what I'm saying. I love that luthiers are sharing, and I think that if anybody wants to see music sort of make a comeback in an industry or whatever, I think we're all kind of from, maybe you're not. I mean, I think, but our generation all kind of a little bit from still that kind of hardcore punk generation where it was a little bit do-it-yourself.
Yeah.
And a lot of the bands that I know I grew up with, as much as I grew up with Led Zeppelin and all these big bands, I also grew up with bands that I thought were huge, but they're just punk rockers and thrashers that just did it on their own. And they influenced like a whole generation of other bands. Like full generations of other bands were influenced by Black Flag and all these bands that just did their own punk rock thing. So I kind of that skateboard mentality and kind of do it yourself. I think it's making like a really big comeback. So if people want an industry back, or people want another good guitar manufacturer to come out and in North America, it's like I just say, well, then do it. Like design it yourself and come up with it, because that's the way it happened before. So there's no one's going to do it for anybody. It's all personal choice, and it's all the choice of what we want to do with it. If musicians want an industry back, make an industry.
Right.
Get one of your rich friends start a label and do it. Honestly, and it's the same thing with a guitar company. It's like if someone wants to do what Paul Reed Smith did and still doing, just go crazy and make it happen. It is possible, but it has to be. No one can be looking at anybody to do it for them. It's just get your buddies involved and go crazy.
I absolutely love your optimism, Les. And speaking of skateboard mentality, you're taking that literally, because because you are branching out from not out away, because it's definitely not away from your instruments. This is my guess is that you see this as one and the same, but you're starting to build skateboards now.
Yeah. I've always loved skateboarding, and my brother and I have always had, even just a passion for the skateboard art, like the art on the decks from back in the day, the graphics, and we used to skateboard a lot back in the day. I was obsessed with it. Same with my brother, and so over the years, just for many years, we've sort of gone back and forth with just kind of jokes of drawing decks. I'll draw up something silly and be like, "What do you think of this?" And he'd be like, "Oh, that's ridiculous." So one day we're just like, maybe we should try making them, get a form and we'll make up some decks. And we started thinking of shapes. And of course, me being the, kind of violin upright bass nut that I am, I was like, oh man, it'd be pretty cool to do one like a skateboard, like a cello plate, we were just messing around with it, and it was just a joke. Everything starts as jokes. Nothing serious. Like the trilogy, there's no way I'm being serious about that stuff. I get serious when I'm making it, but it's still all an inside joke. Even Dragon Eddie bass is all up. It's just an inside joke. It's just sort of like, it's hard to describe. It's really all based on humor. There's really nothing, The only problem with that is then you get into the woodworking part of it. And you go, oh, what have I gotten into?
Yeah. Painting myself into a corner here.
Yeah, this joke went too far. But yeah, no, anyway, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But with the skateboards, I just thought it'd be cool to do something with that. And again, same thing with the modern skateboard sort of being a symmetric sort of skateboard, and a lot of the skateboards from the 80s sort of having more of a, more of a guitar shape, if you will. I thought it'd be kind of cool to sort of blend those two things, and sometimes, again, you see those skateboards that they're making now, they cut the decks down, put guitar necks on it, and make a skateboard that's a playable electric guitar. And so I just thought it'd be kind of cool to do the opposite with one of the models. We have the Radivarius, which just basically looks like a cello archtop plate with trucks and wheels on it. So, that's kind of just the reverse idea. That's all it is, just having fun with. Again, it's all a joke, but then you kind of look at it and see, maybe that's something I can make, and then you start designing it, and you're like, oh, that might be pretty cool. And then if you make it and it works, then at least you can say, well, it's a design that I kind of saw through. There's a lot of designers out there, but to actually make something work and to see it through, that's a bit of a different thing. And we all know that, engineers and stuff fall into the shortcomings of what an idea can be. They're the ones that have to solve all those things. So most of us, we're the designer, we're the engineer, and we're the creative
manufacturer too.
And that's something where a lot of people don't realize that about custom guitar makers, that it really is a lot more than just drawing it out and putting things together. It's at its simplest, I realized, I used to think it was, but at its simplest, a guitar is actually a pretty complicated device.
Oh yeah,
it really is.
It's some really important geometry, and how all of that intersects. I mean, is it's the difference between something that is going to be a true musical tool and something that's going to be a nice thing to hang on the wall.
Oh yeah, and I've noticed that what delineates the two between one another really isn't that much. It's sort of like, whoa, it's a little bit of a 16th of an inch of this.
Right, it could
All of a
be.
sudden,
It could
nothing's
be.
working anymore.
Yeah, yeah. So what kind of what, because I don't know how skateboards are made. What did you have to do to make this leap from the design to the actual to the ability to actually, laminate some decks and get them out there?
Well, what we're doing, we have my brother's got a CNC mill out west, and he's also really good at doing 3D renders, 3D modeling,
Oh,
things
cool.
like that. So, taking in the geometry that we wanted to go for, sort of going between, we want to do two style of decks. We want to do ones that are carved wood, kind of more of an art deck, but looks like is actually physically carved cello plate, that's solid wood. And it's got some reinforcement, but those would be ones that are basically more like wall hangers, just for someone who wants a piece of art. But the real decks that we're doing, the lamination ones, they're all done on positive, negative forms. And, so we've got all the forms all ready to go, and we've got all the shapes all down, and so laminating the decks, with the process for that is also using different kinds of glue. So, you want to use like a veneer glue. Some people will use Type-On, but want to use a more rigid glue. So use a Procat, urea formaldehyde glue, and also putting silk in between the layers. Some learn from an upright base maker who puts silk in between the rims, when you're doing a laminated glue.
Oh, yeah.
So it allows you just to have that crossband strength without having to put an extra laminate of wood in.
Sure.
So a lot of people don't realize that silk is quite strong, and they might put carbon fiber, don't realize that carbon fiber might be a little bit too much.
Yeah.
Silk's got some pretty good strength when you bind it to something. So for the skate decks, we're trying to make them a little bit old school, but a little bit sort of new school with us in terms of just using a glue that's a little bit better to keep the laminates together, and also just the silk to keep it so we can keep the deck really light. Maybe take out a couple crossband layers and make it so it's really got the right buoyancy, as I kind of almost
yeah, totally.
It's definitely something I've been sensitive to over the years. It's just that leverage point of a skateboard, and so I want them to really function on a very high level, so they'll look really nice, but if someone gets on it, I want them to feel that there's been some things that, kind of like we were talking about it earlier with the kinesiology aspect to building a guitar. I want to kind of take into account things that I've noticed with skateboards. So
when you say the positive and negative molds, are those made out of metal, and then you stick them in like a big 2-ton press or something like that?
No. They're just wooden molds, and and that's all. You just put the layers in between and crank the male and female molds together. And I'm also going to be using a little bit of heat there as well. So it cures the deck pretty fast and hardens the glue really good. And you pop it out, and you've got yourself a nice pancake.
Yeah. And are you my knowledge of skateboards is quite thin, because I wanted to be a skateboarder. I really did, but like when I was growing up, during my skateboard prime years, we never lived anywhere there was sidewalks. It was like everything was gravel. It's just like, and so I had like this 10-foot strip of front walk in front of our house between the driveway, which was gravel, and the front door. I would go back and forth there, and so I didn't have a whole lot of. I kind of gave up on it after a little while, but I know that you've got things, how trucks are designed and how they flex and everything like that. Is there are you just using standard hardware for that, or are you trying to go out and maybe even manufacture those as well?
Oh yeah, we're definitely looking to make our own trucks and wheels too really soon. So try and make the entire whatever, minus maybe the bolts for things. But
right.
Other than that, like the trucks, the bushings, the wheels, and obviously we'll use good bearings and stuff for the wheels. But yeah, really try and make it an all kind of inclusive thing. So if anybody wants to come get wheels or get anything for it. There's nothing, they don't have to really look around for it or anything like that. Just get it right from us right away.
Yeah, so. And I suppose your brother being handy with the CNC, that's stuff that you might be able to build in house, or even or subcontract that with a small shop or something like that. That's a little bit better set up. Maybe if you need more axes on the cutters or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or if we need to do anything sort of like, get anything injection molded or get anything like that done, at least let us do all the prototyping and stuff for certain things if we want to do it that way, which has come in handy big time.
So, I think we covered a lot of stuff. Is there anything that we didn't cover that people need to know about Godfrey guitars?
Oh, well, let's see. I don't know if this is cool, but I do have a production guitar coming out. It's my first production guitar. It's being made at HMI, and the body's in the necks, and I'm getting them here. It's called a Zen Master. It's headless, and I'm doing all the assembly of them. It took about a year for me doing all the prototyping and getting everything consolidated for it. But it's a very strange, out there kind of headless guitar, yin and yang theme to it. And I've got that coming up pretty soon. So you'll be able to hit them direct from me, and they're totally production guitar.
Wow, that's really cool. I don't know. Have you put any pictures of the protos on your Instagram, or is that something you're kind of saving for a big reveal?
No, there's some closer to when I first went on about a year ago. I've kind of kept it a little bit hush hush.
Yeah.
I've built several, but since I went in with a little bit of a business partner to get these manufactured.
Oh, cool.
I sort of kept it a little bit hush hush, but they'll be coming in really soon. The process has been wild, but it's been something and very cool. But so it's just a little fun project. I always wanted to try something like that, and I thought the time was right to just try and do something a little bit different with just one of my designs. I thought, well, this thing is so out there. It's kind of a little bit like a headless guitar. It's larger than a travel size. It's a full Strat scale length, but it's very out there. It's kind of based on a yin yang theme, and it's called a Zen Master. Comes with a gig bag and everything that I got custom made for it. And so
wow.
I've got that all coming in pretty soon. So I don't know. I just thought I would try something a little different and have something that's readily available that I designed, got computer scanned, did all the prototyping, and got samples for. And everything's been going pretty cool.
That is super cool. I here we're having this conversation. You're saying, like, if you want to do something, go out and do it, because you're talking from personal experience here.
Oh, well, and it's funny. I don't even know what I'm doing half the time. I just know that, I know that we all have ideas and we all have things. And I found that if I just sit on all of them, then they'll just sit there. So I thought, why not just see if there's ones that just, you appeal more, or, do you think that you might have some personal longevity with, not just monetarily. I mean, in terms of have some intrinsic interest in it for a while. And it's hard to gauge what we might be interested in a year or two as builders. So maybe we'll just get turned on by something completely different, or on a whole other aspect to the builds or whatever. Maybe we'll go completely acoustic. I've been doing electrics for 10 years, and all of a sudden overnight, I want to just make acoustic guitars.
Screw this.
and that's the beauty. That's the beauty of it all. Is there's nothing that's really keeping anybody in anything. We all have our, as my brother used to say, we all have our phantom fan base. It's like, and realistically, there's, someone can say, hey, man, well, you're the guy that does the scrolls. And I'm like, well, yeah, but my eyes are going like this, my eyes are moving in opposite directions from doing so many scrolls. So maybe I want to do something that I can kind of regain my, my straight vision as opposed to my double scroll vision. So hence, a trilogy.
The trilogy, this is right. This is right.
It's fun to have. It's just good to have a good time with it. Most of the criteria that we're working with has been relatively predetermined. So augmenting it, changing the permutations a little bit, it's fun, and we can all agree upon, usually unanimously, what's kind of working or not working. Whether we're musicians or we're luthiers, it's sort of like, well, that sounds good, or I don't know about that, or that. So I like it. We all keep each other in line, and I'll keep the ideas moving, right? So, I think that's the beauty of it all. Because I've never seen any two guitar makers do the same thing, and I've never played two guitars the same ever once
Mm-hmm.
in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Never met two people the same. Never met. So that's what I
Yeah.
mean. It's all about individuality, finding a little bit of identity as a builder, and it's really not that hard to do. We're all unique. So if you do what you want to do and trying to try the ideas that you want to try out, I think that's sort of that's what it's all about. It really is.
I so appreciate your optimism in this, and how willing you are to not only just try out all these different ideas that you've got swirling around your head, but like you said before, see them through to the end,
Yeah.
and and let there still be there's still room in the world for whatever you want to build,
Oh,
however many strings, how big, how long, how heavy, whatever you want to do. It's there. There's a guitar out there for everybody.
oh yeah, and encouragement is a huge thing. Like, I mean, I've had people encourage me. I don't know. I try and humbly encourage other people.
Hmm.
But I'll just say this, I literally go on people's pages who are just starting out. I always feel like I'm kind of just starting out because we're always just learning, right? It always feels new. But I'll just say this: I don't know about other people, but every single guitar that I see, especially from like people who are just starting, whether it's their first guitar, I always get so excited about how excited they probably were to plug it in for the first time. And it doesn't matter if it's a qualified piece of crap. It just got through it.
Yeah.
I said, oh, I got to get through my first one.
Yeah.
Nothing is more exciting than that. So I get excited for other people's excitement very, very quickly. So someone might be, oh, this was a failure, this was that. I'm like, did you plug it in? Yeah. And I'm like, was that exciting? They're like, yeah, it totally was. I'm like, well, you can look at the negatives too, and you're going to get to those. But at the same time, you can enjoy the tiny little bits of glory along the way. It's not, you don't have to be afraid to. It's not ego or anything. It's just enjoy what you do.
Yeah.
But I want to rock everybody's guitar. If I see anybody's guitar that they're building, whether it's a beginner or whether it's your guitars or whether it's like a Matsuda guitar or one of Dave Wren's acoustics, I literally right away I'm like, I want to play that so badly. Like, give me that, like, give me that guitar. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, it's fun stuff. It's good to have a good time.
Yeah, and that's at the end of the day, what are we doing this for? We're making things, we're making instruments, we're making tools, we're making toys, we're making things that people want to play with and play on and be inspired by, and hopefully fun is is part of it. We gotta remember fun.
And I'll just say it. I mean, to interject any little bit of ego into it, I think what we were saying it the other day is like someone could say, man, I used to play out and all that kind of stuff. And someone could say to me, oh, man, when you want to be on stage playing one of your own guitars and doing this and that, I'm like, I would long bypass that dream. I'm like, I would literally, like, I will say that honestly speaking, and I mean no ego, like, I'd like to go see a ZZ Top concert, for instance, right? Of course, right? And I'd have a great time. But if he was playing on one of my trilogies, Billy, I have to admit, I might have a little slightly better time at that. I might be like looking around going, I'm not telling anybody. So I'm just saying, so it's a good way to kind of sneak that little thing in there with places, and get your guitars to the people who you want to get them to.
Yeah.
Not to be biased, but there might be certain players who you feel might benefit right away from one of your instruments. So I say, get into those people, man. They all want to hear from you, man. So, like, remember back in the day when everybody wanted a record deal and some of your friends would get signed, some would, So it was like, I kind of want to, I'd rather be kind of like the person who's like, I don't know, like one of the luthiers or whatever, that's just sort of like easy to approach and like, we can just get it happening, that kind of thing, as opposed to, you know what I mean. Yeah, rite of passage. Yeah. Right.
Well, Les, it has been an absolute pleasure finally talking to you here. I've been admiring your stuff on Instagram for a little while now, and just I love how you'll post these great black and white kind of artsy shots, and then the next one you're just shirtless and shredding.
It's all part of it, and I'll just keep this really brief. It's like, you read about musicians read about the people that we admire, from like Steve Ray Vaughan to Augustine Berrios, from the late 1800s, and they're all wild. Joni Mitchell, everybody, they're all wild cats. Like this, so there's nothing normal about them, And so I just noticed that, I just like to just sort of just be myself and not really, somebody might say, well, you make these really refined instruments, this and that. I'm like, yeah, but to make them, it's really hot and there's a lot of work. Mm-hmm. And so I like having fun with it all, sort of like, what's the word? It's all humor to me, but responsibly so. Like I'm a professional. I've never had a guitar returned in my life. I've built about 252 basses at least. And long story is just, I find that if you can't sort of be humorous about it, have fun at yourself, and just sort of have a good time, it's hard to progress.
Yeah.
It really is. It's hard to progress if you stay too rigid with it, you won't progress. Yeah.
Well, we're about just the right length here for a show.
Thank you, Jason.
I'm gonna keep you online here, but we're gonna hit the recording. So, for the Luthiers podcast, this has been Jason Rodgers, and with me, Les Godfrey. And thank you very much for listening. Bye bye.